Still a few years before Austin Powers' Deadly Divas, an entire generation was introduced to and sometimes titillated by the AI of famous female robots. I'm Victor, and straight out of the Gen Experience, autonomons that surprised and intrigued Gen Xer boys and girls. In a world crowded with 3POs, Maximilians, and T-100s, it was always fresh, if not relatively surprising, to witness a mechanized woman in a major role. Some sexy, some senseless. Let's rank 10 of these favorite fembots from the Gen Experience. Fembot may sound very mechanical, but moving forward, please note this term represents all robotic, android, or artificial intelligent types. We aim to be diverse. But don't rely on AI to click like. Make sure to press the subscribe button and support my endeavors about a time when Gen X was young. Some call it the worst show ever to air in the 1980s, and I completely agree. That doesn't mean it's not a guilty pleasure for some. For those with a glutton for punishment, Small Wonder is a wonder it got on the air. A typical family comedy of the 80s, but their daughter is a robot. The father made Vicky at work and wants to keep her at home to develop her into a family environment. Instead of explaining this, he tries to pass her off as a family member they've adopted as their daughter. A sibling for their son, and someone who will never grow up. And it's all a secret. This is just way too much to unpack here, so you might need the couch. There is a strange resurgence of popularity in this anomaly of TV that amazingly got 4 seasons. Perhaps it is the realization that the poor actress to portray the family robot, Vicky, seems to have gotten away free from the dumpster fire of spiraling into a drug-fueled demise so many child stars do. In the show, Vicky is an acronym, so contrived and outlandish, I'm not even going to bother. The comedy comes from keeping her undercover while the neighbors just keep popping up. If you wanted her to blend in, then you shouldn't have waited until the 3rd season to start letting her wear clothes other than the red dress and pinafore. That wasn't suspicious at all. The cheap-ass electrical box with hinged door on her back was just part of how they sold the audience on Vicky as a robot. But the writing, acting, and laugh track left few redeeming qualities. I guess watching it's like a train wreck for some. Then again, who can resist Edie McClurg as the nosy neighbor?
Well, I never.
Yeah, and you never will with them soup cans on your head.
Listen, young lady, I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you most certainly don't fit in this town. Why, you don't even fit in that dress.
Fortunately, there was no Small Wonder action figures, and any merchandising was relegated to one Halloween costume in 1985. Now that's scary. Getting the worst out of the way early, let's honor the recently deceased half of Sid and Marty Croft. Marty, with he and his brother's live-action Saturday morning kid show, The Lost Saucer from 1975, and in endless reruns. Remember this one? If you don't, you may have just blocked it out, and I totally understand. So I may have to remind you, it starred Jim Nabors as Fum and Ruth Buzzy as Fi. Yes, that Ruth Buzzy from Laugh-In. Technically an android, Fi is little more than your brother's 1970s robot Halloween costume of cardboard, twinkle lights, and dryer tubes. The show was interesting enough for me to watch as a kid, but I never believed they were robots. Simply a creepy old couple in costume who invited kids to check out their spaceship before kidnapping them. Had this boy and his babysitter never heard of Strangers with Candy? That could be the premise of a new Netflix horror limited series. With only 16 episodes, Fi can't pilot a spaceship and can't top our list of most memorable fembots. Mystery Science Theater 3000 debuted in 1988 and still clearly within the Gen Experience. New Gen Xer youth went for the zany premise, with much of the appeal of this movie hosting madness being the robots. One being Gypsy, or GPC, the robot that rarely joins the cast in the theater but handles the higher functions of the Satellite of Love spacecraft. Gypsy was built from a Century Infant love seat, ever-ready flashlight parts, foam tubing for her dull gray lips, and a long black PVC hose for her neck. She's generally purple, and occasionally the tubing on her lips is colored red, giving the effect that she's wearing lipstick. She is a large robot that, over the show's lifespan, developed and evolved her character, mostly becoming part of the host segments outside of the movie riffing. She also has an unrequited love for B-actor Richard Basehart. Gypsy might be made of some of the lowest tech spare parts, but it was her humor that makes her a fan favorite remembered today, and that gets her on the list well ahead of the ridiculous Fi and Vicky.
You betcha, Mr. J.
No, that's not Harley Quinn agreeing to a felony with her Putin the Joker, but Rosie responding to her boss, Mr. George Jetson, of course. Rosie the robot was the older model XB500 maid and housekeeper that Jane could only afford. becoming friends with Mrs. Jetson and the rest of the titular family during their 1960s first season. Rosie kept their googie architecture in the skypad apartments of Orbit City spick and span. Surprisingly, the second season didn't debut until the 1980s and offered Rosie a bigger part. A relative clunker of a robot, Rosie is prone to glitchy tics. She became surrogate aunt to son Elroy and daughter Judy, and was perfect to help raise the kids with all the hard button-pushing work Jane had to contend with in her high-rise of the future. Rosie's sassy comments to George gained her popularity, and she was rewarded with a vintage tin wind-up toy in her likeness. Cindy Morgan played our number 6 Fembot, and number 6 may seem indignant to someone who passed away only over a week ago at 69 years old. Becoming famous as the lead female in the classic comedy Caddyshack, she went on to co-star with Jeff Bridges and Bruce Boxleitner for Disney's groundbreaking Tron in 1982. As groundbreaking as it was, Tron did not catapult her to stardom, but the character Yori, the program in the digital realm of the master computer program, was created by Laura, her user also played by Morgan. Although I do believe they could have given some fan service with shoehorning in at least a mention of Yori in Tron Legacy, she's still a vital chunk of the original story and a part of the iconic cult film. As a living program in the world of Tron, Yori definitely fits our Fembot list in the form of AI. Getting shafted by the original toy line by Tomy, she has made a more modern appearance with a set from Kubrick's. In 1987, teen Gen Xers were all about their Spaceballs, and when it comes to Mel Brooks' classic comedy send-up of Star Wars, if you're going to have a memorable Fembot, then none other than Joan Rivers will do. This is Dot Matrix. No, not that kind. This golden mechanical masterpiece with stiff skirt and tinsel hair acted as matron or lady-in-waiting to the Princess Vespa. She dished out one-liners and responded in brash repartee, unlike her kindred male inspiration. I'd like to call her the feminine side of C-3PO, but he already has that covered. And Dot was a tough cookie who could give it right back to Lone Star when our favorite put-upon goldenrod could not do the same with Han Solo. You wouldn't survive a battle of wits with our number 5 Fembot. Dot gets the spot even if it's just for her built-in security system.
We'll have none of that, mister. How far did he get? What did he touch? What did he touch?
Nothing happened.
What the hell was that noise?
That was my Virgin alarm. It's programmed to go off before you do.
Even with the movie and character's cult status and popularity, and the obviously in-film running joke, the decision was clearly made early on that no toy merchandising would be created to hawk or sell when the movie was originally released. And besides some customs, that still seems true today. As Generation 1 Transformers are probably my all-time favorite 80s franchise, I still can't believe I didn't put her closer to number 1, but at least she's in the top 4. I'm talking about Arcee, the queen of the Fembots for any original Transformers fan of Gen X. The most famous of the female Autobots, and yes, there was more than one. Any Gen Xer will remember their surprise and delight when first introduced to Arcee through the original 1986 animated Transformers movie premiere. The mechanized Princess Leia to our ragtag band might have been in whites and pinks, but her badass Cybertronian car alt mode was rad, especially the spikes from the wheels. It seems pretty obvious she was added without a real thought for her transformation scheme, as seen here where her thighs just balloon out into wheel wells. Now, that is unfortunate. How do you translate that into a toy, right? They did, however, have a design in mind and a prototype made. Scrapping the pink for orange to probably attract a boy audience, her misshapen proportions might have been what saved her from the toy shelves. Another, as I say, mercy killing. Today, she is done right with elevated quality and stellar likeness to her original counterpart thanks to 21st century action figure designs. Even as a fully mechanized Fembot, Arcee has been given some fan service that has gone beyond her boundaries. But even the official cartoon used her animation model to sex her up for completely different characters in what can only be described as adult RoboFilm. Although Arcee was a main character in seasons 3 and 4, The Headmasters and beyond, she was not the only one. Her popularity among fans was obvious, and the showrunners quickly backpedaled and introduced a number of other female Autobot warriors left on Cybertron as a cell of rebels to fight the remaining Decepticons. The most famous of the new Fembots was Ilia 1, but she was joined by another popular character, Chromia, and then a group of 4 others, with no real detail into their backstory or even clear alt modes until just recently. When in the 21st century, these 1980s Fembots were created into action figures. They received their unique head molds from the OG series, with green lights being the most ridiculous, but with a common body buck and transformation, differentiated slightly and mostly with paint application. Arcee, Ilia 1, and Chromia continue their popularity in this franchise of Fembots, whose longevity shows no sign of slowing down if the addition of other female Transformers are any indication. A truly remarkable film Fembot, the surprise appearance of V'ger's probe on the Enterprise in Star Trek The Motion Picture made for some exciting storytelling, if not for some awkward tingling in sci-fi geeks of the audience. Not since Maria of Metropolis in the Silent Era was there such a sensual android of feminine proportions to appear on screen. After assimilating Starfleet officer Ilia, the probe that replaced her was only Ilia in appearance. The crew was shocked at her arrival, and although she was only an AI probe, she was met with interest, especially from the
Kirk unit.
With the history of womanizing James T. Kirk has had, you might be surprised there was no copulation or even kinky fraternizing with the
Kirk unit.
But even so, you can imagine the obvious choice of her short costume made all Trekkies stand at attention. Creative storylines and deep concepts gave this original idea a happy ending. For Captain Decker at least, who got maximum satisfaction in the end by the Ilia probe. The finale makes it feel like the end for our smooth-headed heroine, but this android-type Fembot must live on. Collectors were pretty lucky at the premiere of the film when Mego came out with action figures including Ilia in her Starfleet uniform and a 12-inch figure in her probe costume, so any collector interested in this Fembot has some options. Soon after Ilia probed her invaders on the Enterprise, Replicants jumped ship back to Earth to find the secret of life. More of it, that is, all while Blade Runners hunted them down. Number 2 are the female Replicants of Blade Runner. With the lifespan of only 4 years, the replicants created by the Tyrell Corporation were developing emotions. They had implanted memories and were beginning to feel, to become more human. Although born in a lab as full-grown adult android-type robots nearly identical to any of us, they had specific functions programmed for them, but were almost indistinguishable from other humans. Blending in with the population, each renegade replicant was part of the plan. Zora was a pleasure model that had been retrained for political homicide, hiding out as an exotic dancer until time to strike. She gave Deckard a run for his money before being retired and ending her life as a decoration in a department store display window. Pris was a fellow pleasure model categorized as military/leisure. Tactical and cunning, she helped get the other replicants closer to their father, their creator, and the secret to extending their own lives. Sadly, she was violently retired, but not before showing off her best Mary Lou Retton-inspired beatings of Harrison Ford's Blade Runner. The last skin job is the replicant Rachel. A new model from Tyrell, she had no idea she was a replicant at first, but as she and Deckard fell in love, she came to peace with it and the realization she would always be in danger. After feeling almost reborn in the dying words of Roy Batty, Deckard ends his blade running career and runs off with Rachel in a very questionable ending. Well, that is until the sequel, Blade Runner 2049, years later. Very little original merchandise came out with the film. Today, you can find a lot of collectible and limited edition figurines and statues. Although Funko Pop has a great collection from Blade Runner, they unforgivably forgot Zora. The 3 replicant Fembots are number 2 on this list for their femme fatale android interpretation. And number 1 should be no surprise, the original, the namesake, where it all started, the first and officially named Fembots, the villainous enemies of Jamie Summers and the whole OSI organization in The Bionic Woman and even the $6 Million Man. Sure, there was Maskatron for Steve Austin, but this is about Fembots, and there is nothing more surprisingly sci-fi and freakish than the robotic faces under the human tissue of the glamorous agents known as Fembots. The original Bionic Woman created these characters to lend a little feminine arch-enemy tension and obvious girl-on-girl action for the show. They were popular and deadly, with some obvious and unspoken similarities to the 1960s Stepford Wives. The array of fashion model-like designs for the Fembots were all equipped with either a turtleneck or a smart scarf to hide the seams of their face plates. Years before Mike Myers took inspiration for his glamorous 60s-esque killer cyborg Fembots in Austin Powers, the first trained killers with computers for brains were these fabulous 70s chicks who were both frightening and hysterical, although unintentionally. So popular were they that Kenner made them into collectible action dolls for your bionic toy arsenal. Without the First Lady of Fembots here in America, there would be no Board Queen, 7 of 9, Eve, TX, or Her in today's culture. The rise of female robots, androids, and AI had to evolve from somewhere, and their humble beginnings have created a long list of entries into incredible mechanized feminine faces and even some memorable action figures and toys of the same. What do you think about my ranking, and did I forget any famous female synthetics from American movie or TV pop culture who took up residence during the Gen experience? Those influential years of youth for anyone born in that generation. Thank you for joining me on this scientific romp and ranking of historical robotic women during an era dominated by male-centric droids and walking computers. Now that I have said robot more times than I'd like to, please consider supporting the Gen experience with a like and a subscribe. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Take a look around at other great content on the channel from the era that offered the most memorable trends, franchises, and events that are still talked about today. Thanks for watching, and until next time.
Color unit.